Okay, let's dive right into this. We've all been there, right? Staring at a test. The clock is ticking. SATs, final exams, you name it. It seems like we humans have always been a little obsessed with trying to measure and rank intelligence. But how do you even do that? How do you put a number on something you literally can't see?
So to get our brains warmed up, let's try a few. Real quick. Which one of these is least like the others? Apple, banana, grape, bicycle. Got it?
Okay, next one. Juice is to glass as hand is to what? Don't overthink it.
And let's try one more for good measure. Bernice had some jelly beans. She ate one, gave half of what was left to Bruno, and now she has 5. So, how many did she start with? Now don't worry, I promise I'll give you the answers later. But questions just like these are the bread and butter of modern intelligence tests.
And that really brings us to the heart of what we're talking about today. We're fascinated by the idea of measuring intelligence. But the tests we use, well, they're constantly on trial. So what actually makes a test score meaningful?
This whole quest to put a number on brain power has given us tests like the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, that's the WAIS, and a version for kids called the WISC. These are pretty much the gold standard in the field today, and they test everything from your vocabulary to how well you can spot a pattern.
Now, you gotta understand, these kinds of tests usually come in 2 main flavors. You've got achievement tests, think of your history final. Those are designed to see what you've already learned. But then you have aptitude tests, like the WISE. Their goal is different. They're trying to predict your ability to learn something new. It's a really important distinction.
So how do we know if any of these tests are actually good at what they do? I mean, you can't just throw a bunch of random questions at someone and call it science, right? Turns out there are some very strict rules to this game, a checklist that any legit psychological test has to follow.
For an intelligence test to even be considered remotely serious, it has to clear 3 huge hurdles. It's kind of like a trifecta. The tests absolutely must be standardized, reliable, and valid. These are the 3 pillars that hold the whole thing up.
So what does all that actually mean? Let's break it down. First up, standardization. Your raw score, say getting 50 questions right, is totally meaningless on its own. What matters is how you did compared to everyone else. So test makers give the test to a huge representative sample of people first. That group's scores create a baseline, the famous bell curve, and your score only has meaning once you see where you fall on that curve.
Next up is reliability. This one's pretty simple, actually. It just means the test has to be consistent. If you take the test on a Monday and then again a month later, your scores should be pretty darn similar. If they are, we can say the test is reliable. It gives you dependable results.
And finally, the big one, validity. This is the million-dollar question. Does the test actually measure what it says it's measuring? For example, if an IQ test is good at predicting who will get good grades in college, we'd say it has predictive validity. And this is where things start to get really, really messy.
Because that question of validity throws us headfirst into one of the oldest debates there is: nature versus nurture. Are we born with a certain level of intelligence that's locked in by our genes, or is it all about how we're raised? Let's start with the case for nature.
The evidence from twin studies is just wild. Get this. Identical twins share 100% of their genes, right? Well, their intelligence scores are incredibly similar, even when they're adopted into different families and raised apart. In fact, look at this. Identical twins raised in different homes are still more alike in their scores than fraternal twins who grew up together in the same house. That's a pretty powerful clue. And there's more. Brain scans show that identical twins have brains that are almost identical in structure and function. And here's another kicker. Studies of adopted children show that as they get older, their intelligence scores start looking less like their adoptive parents and more like their biological parents, who they may have never even met. So yeah, genes clearly play a huge role.
But hold on. Before you think it's all predetermined, let me just say, genes are not the whole story. Not even close. Our environment, our experiences, they are massively important. So let's flip the coin and look at the power of nurture.
One of the most powerful and frankly heartbreaking examples of this comes from a study at a struggling Iranian orphanage back in the 70s. A psychologist named J. McVicker Hunt observed the children there and came to a stunning conclusion. The environment was so neglectful that it was basically overriding any genetic potential these kids had. You see, in this orphanage, the infants got very little personal attention. Their cries were ignored. They learned that nothing they did mattered. So they just became vacant and passive. But then Hunt started a program. He trained the staff to talk to the babies, to play with them, to respond to them. And the change was incredible. The kids just blossomed. It was dramatic proof of how much our environment can shape our minds.
So we've got nature and nurture locked in this complex dance. But there's one more giant twist in this story. What if the problem isn't just in our genes or environment? What if the test itself is biased?
A test is considered biased if it ends up measuring cultural experience instead of what we think of as raw intelligence. And this is a perfect, if pretty awful, example. Years ago, new immigrants were given tests with questions like, who was the first American president? When they didn't know, they were labeled as feeble-minded. The test wasn't measuring how smart they were, it was measuring how Americanized they were.
And the bias doesn't just have to be in the questions. Sometimes it's inside our own heads. There's this incredible phenomenon called stereotype threat. It's this fear that you're going to mess up and confirm a negative stereotype about a group you belong to. And that fear can actually make you perform worse. For instance, multiple studies have shown that if you remind women that men supposedly do better on a math test, right before they take it, their scores actually drop. The fear becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And honestly, the potential sources of bias are everywhere. Questions can be written in a way that favors people from a certain background, say urban and upper class. Even something as simple as the race or gender of the person giving you the test can have a subtle effect on your score. The big point here is that a number on a page is never, ever as simple as it looks.
So, after all of that, after wading through genes, environment, reliability, validity, and bias, what are we supposed to make of all this? What's the real takeaway from this long, complicated human project of trying to measure the mind?
I think it's this. An intelligence test is a tool. It's not a verdict. It can be a really useful tool for sure. It can help schools identify a kid who needs extra help or one who needs a bigger challenge, but it is not the final word on who you are. So please, don't ever let a number define you.
Because every single one of us is full of this infinite, surprising, and completely unmeasurable potential. Oh, and I almost forgot. You've been waiting patiently for the answers to those brain teasers, right? The odd one out is the bicycle. It's not a fruit. Hand is to glove. And our friend Bernice, she started her day with 23 jelly beans.